I've always loved listening to Mr. Nightmare's stories while babysitting. It made the long hours fly by, and his calm, chilling voice set the perfect mood for a quiet night. I was 17 then, new to babysitting, and that night I was in charge of 2 kids while their parents attended a party next door. I set up the living room with their favorite cartoons and sank into my room with my earbuds and phone, ready to immerse myself in another terrifying tale. The night began like any other. I sat on my bed in the dim light, scrolling through my messages while Mr. Nightmare narrated a story about a mysterious figure stalking a family. His voice was measured, drawing me deeper into the narrative. Downstairs, the children giggled at the cartoons, their laughter blending with the soft hum of the television. Everything seemed normal until the podcast reached a particularly eerie moment. Just as Mr. Nightmare described a shadow creeping along a wall, I heard a sudden burst of static from downstairs. I paused the podcast, my heart skipping a beat. I tiptoed down the stairs, thinking the old TV might be acting up. When I reached the living room, I found the screen had turned to nothing but flickering static. The cheerful cartoons were gone, replaced by a grainy mess of white noise. I felt a prickle of unease, but told myself it was just a technical glitch on an old TV. I returned to my room and reinserted my earbuds, trying to focus on the story again. But that's when I noticed something odd. Amid the static in my ear, a muffled voice, not Mr. Nightmare's calm tone, whispered clear words. "Check the closet." I froze, my blood running cold. I paused the audio, blaming it on interference or my tired mind playing tricks on me. I even chuckled nervously, trying to convince myself that I was overthinking things. No sooner had I dismissed the eerie suggestion than my baby monitor, a small device I had set up in the living room to keep an eye on the kids, suddenly crackled to life. The familiar static gave way to a faint, deliberate whisper. "Now check under the crib." My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped toward the crib where one of the kids lay sleeping, completely unaware of the terror unfolding. I looked around frantically, trying to spot any sign of movement or an intruder. There was nothing, only the dim shadows of a quiet room. Fear overwhelmed me. I quickly scooped up the children, whispering that we needed to leave immediately. I didn't wait for any further explanation or questions from them. I just knew something was terribly wrong. Gripping their small hands tightly, I ushered them out into the night. The rain had started to fall, and the cold droplets felt like tiny needles on my skin as I hurried away from the house. Outside, my shaking fingers dialed 911. I tried to explain the situation in halting, terrified words. The glitching TV, the whispered messages over my earbuds and baby monitor, and the gut-wrenching feeling that someone had been watching us. The operator's calm voice did little to ease my racing heart as I waited for the police to arrive. Hours later, after the officers had combed through every corner of the house, they made a startling discovery in the attic. Hidden behind a stack of old boxes and covered in dust was a homeless man, his eyes wild and desperate. In his trembling hands, he clutched a phone that was still playing the same Mr. Nightmare episode I had been listening to. The police explained that he had been using our home as a hideout, sneaking in through an unlocked window when no one was looking. Somehow, he had tapped into our devices. He had been recording and then broadcasting his own version of Mr. Nightmare's story, using our baby monitor, and even causing the TV to glitch. The realization struck me like a lightning bolt. The voices I heard were not supernatural at all, but the work of a disturbed man hiding in the attic. Every eerie moment, from the whispered, "Check the closet," to the chilling command to "check under the crib," had been his twisted idea of a scare. I shuddered, thinking of how close the terror had come to turning into a nightmare, much worse than any podcast could describe. That night changed me. I had always enjoyed a good scare from a horror story, but experiencing one firsthand left me shaken to my core. I learned to trust my instincts and realized that sometimes real life can be even more frightening than the tales we listen to for fun. Even now, Whenever I hear static in my earbuds or see a glitch on a screen, I remember that stormy night and the homeless man hidden in our attic. It was a lesson in caution, a reminder that horror can come from unexpected places, and sometimes the most disturbing stories are the ones we live through. I never thought a quiet night at the library could turn into a real-life horror story. I'm a college student, and I often stayed late in the campus library to study and listen to Mr. Nightmare's podcasts. His calm, eerie voice helped me feel safe amid the silence of the stacks. That night, I needed the comfort of his stories more than ever. I arrived at the library just before closing time. The building was nearly empty, and I chose a small table in a secluded corner. I put on my earbuds and pressed play on my phone. Tonight's episode was about a girl trapped in a library with a dangerous man hiding among the shelves. The story was simple and the voice soothing, and for a while, I forgot my worries. After a while, I noticed something odd. The overhead lights began to flicker and then went off completely. I sat in near darkness, the only light coming from my phone screen. I reached for my phone, but it was already dead. Strangely, the podcast kept playing, the sound filling the space in my ears as if nothing had happened. I tried to shrug off the unease, thinking it might be a power glitch in an old building. I resumed listening to the story, trying to ignore the strange silence that now surrounded me. The narrative continued, describing a girl lost in the library who heard a voice telling her to hide. The words made me shiver. Then, in the quiet, I heard a real sound, a soft thud like a book falling to the floor. At first, I thought it was part of the podcast's sound effects, but the noise was too clear and too loud. My heart began to race. I listened carefully. The thuds came again, irregular and echoing in the darkness. I wondered if someone was moving the books or if the building was settling. But then, amid the noise, a muffled voice whispered, almost hidden by the ambient sound, "Stay quiet. Hide now." I froze. It was not Mr. Nightmare's calm tone, but something deeper and more urgent. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady my rapid heartbeat. I looked around in the dark, feeling as if unseen eyes were watching me. I couldn't tell if the sound was coming from behind the shelves or from the far end of the room. With trembling fingers, I gathered my things and crept toward the exit. Each step I took echoed loudly in the silence. I kept my ears open, listening for any more unexpected sounds, but all I heard was my own breathing and the fading echoes of the thuds. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The thought of that whispered command and the falling books made my skin crawl. I pushed the door open slowly and stepped into the cool night air. Outside, the campus was dimly lit, and I hurried along the empty path until I reached a safe, well-lit area. I immediately called campus security and explained what had happened. The sudden blackout, the dead phone, the podcast continuing, and most of all, the eerie sounds in the library. The next day, I could hardly sleep. My mind replayed every moment from that night. I eventually learned that security had reviewed the library's CCTV footage. They found something I could hardly believe. In the grainy video, I saw a janitor following me through the dark corridors. His face was hidden in shadow, but his eyes looked focused and cold. In one shot, he held a length of rope in his hand, and in another, he slipped a USB drive into his pocket. Later, the police discovered that the drive was loaded with several episodes of Mr. Nightmare's podcast, including the one I had been listening to. The thought that someone had been trailing me, using my safe space to play out his own twisted version of a horror story, left me numb. It was as if the line between the podcast and reality had blurred, and I had become part of a disturbing plan. The janitor's actions, his careful presence in the shadows, and his strange tools of a rope and a USB drive, all of it felt like a cruel mimicry of the very stories I had trusted to bring me comfort. I now understand that some nights can hide secrets that are far worse than any fiction. I learned that night not to take comfort in ghostly voices alone, for sometimes the real danger is lurking in plain sight. Every time I walk by a quiet hallway or hear a faint thud, I remember that night. I remember how the simple act of listening to a horror story became a real nightmare. Since then, I have become more cautious. I now leave the library well before closing time and always check that my phone is fully charged. I also make sure I have a friend with me if I have to stay late. Even though I try to move on, the memory of that night haunts me, reminding me that sometimes horror is not just a story, but a reality waiting in the dark. I've always loved my early morning jogs. The cool air, the quiet streets, and the steady rhythm of my footsteps gave me time to think. That morning, like most, I had my earbuds in, listening to one of Mr. Nightmare's podcasts. His calm voice told a story about a stalker, a person who memorizes routines and watches from the shadows. His words sent a chill down my spine, but somehow, they also made me feel brave. I told myself it was just a story, nothing more. I left my apartment at dawn and began my usual route along the tree-lined streets. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. As I ran, Mr. Nightmare's words mixed with the sounds of my pounding heart. The story of the stalker played on, and every detail felt all too real. I tried to focus on my breathing in the peaceful morning, but then I saw something unusual. Halfway through my run, near a bend in the road, I noticed a white van parked on the side of the trail. It was out of place. I had seen that spot many times before, and I never remembered a van there. Its windows were dark, and it sat still as if it were waiting for something. I felt a small knot of worry tighten in my stomach. I remembered the podcast narrator's advice. Trust your gut. I took that to heart. I decided to change my route. Instead of following my usual path, I turned down a side street I rarely used. I hoped the change would put distance between me and the strange van. But as I rounded the corner, I glanced in my peripheral vision and saw that the van was still there. Worse, it seemed to be following me, keeping a steady pace. My heart began to race faster than usual. I pushed myself harder, increasing my pace. The van's headlights appeared in my mirror-like reflection as it followed me along the quiet street. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The sound of my footsteps mixed with the persistent beat of my heart in my ears. Every instinct told me to run faster, to get away from this unknown danger. Just as panic started to take hold, I saw a small gas station ahead. Without a second thought, I veered off the street and sprinted toward the bright, welcoming lights of the station. I burst through the door and called out to the lone clerk behind the counter. "Please, can I use your phone?" I asked, barely catching my breath. The clerk, startled by my sudden appearance and frantic tone, quickly handed me a phone. I dialed 911, my hands trembling as I reported my fear of being followed. When I looked out the window, the white van was gone. The parking lot was empty, and there was no sign of the vehicle. I stayed inside the gas station for several minutes, trying to calm my racing heart and gather my thoughts. The clerk's worried eyes made me realize that I was not overreacting. I left the station and returned home, the unsettling feeling still heavy in my mind. I couldn't shake the fear that I had been truly followed. For weeks after that morning, every time I went jogging, I looked over my shoulder. I even changed my route more than once, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I told a few friends about the incident, but they simply said it was a trick of the early dawn light and an overactive imagination. Then, one day, a construction crew working on a new building near my favorite trail made a disturbing discovery. They found a small box of old Polaroids buried beneath some loose soil near the path. When the police examined the photos, they realized that each picture showed a part of my jogging route. The pictures were dated every day of that month. The images captured the same bend, the same stretch of pavement I had run on that fateful morning. I felt a cold wave of terror wash over me as I looked at the photos. It was as if someone had been following me every day, watching my every move. The simple act of enjoying my morning jog had turned into a nightmare I could not escape. Even now, when I lace up my shoes at dawn, I can't help but wonder if someone is watching me from a distance. And every time I hear Mr. Nightmare's voice in my earbuds, I remember that morning, the white van, the chase, and the terrible secret buried along my route.